It's a simple question with a tremendously complicated answer.
I can tell you very adamantly is that a CISO doesn't own the general risk of the company. If you come into my shop and tell me that I do, I'll be the dragon. I'll bite your head off.
We have seen security and risk leaders get blamed, get fired. We've recently seen some pretty big cyber incidents where the CEOs are getting called to task.
Should I accept the risk working with this vendor? Should I change the vendor? Am I prepared if something happens to that vendor?
When everybody owns a problem, nobody owns a problem. Thoughts? Greetings and salutations, one and all. Welcome to today's episode of Third Party. Today, we are going to have a very passionate discussion, I think. Today, we are talking about accountability, responsibility, and ownership for risk. It's a simple question with a tremendously complicated answer. Who owns this risk? Bob, who owns it?
Not me, okay?
What about you?
During this episode, I don't want to take any risk. I will be less shitty. You guys are the expert. You can talk.
But I mean, in all seriousness, it's a really serious problem, right? We have seen security and risk leaders get blamed, get fired. We've recently seen some pretty big cyber incidents where the CEOs are getting called to task. We have seen court cases. We've seen people be convicted. We've seen people go to jail. I think before we really jump into the conversation, I think there's a taxonomy conversation I think that we need to have. We hear a lot of different terms, right? Ownership, responsibility, accountability. How do we sort of define those in such a way that everyone can, or most everyone can agree on what these things are before we even talk about who owns it, who's accountable, what do these things mean? So, Bob, from your perspective, what's the difference between, I think, accountability and responsibility, I think, are two key ones.
Well, what does risk mean? So you're asking...
Back to that one again? Yeah. I thought we'd put that to rest.
No, we never will because everybody has their own definition. And it's, as a CISO, I can tell you very adamantly is that a CISO doesn't own the general risk of the company. If you come into my shop and tell me that I do... I'll be the dragon. I'll bite your head off. I have a significant amount of responsibility around risk, understanding it, interpreting it, informing, third-party risk assessment. Obviously, we're looking at the risk of third parties. We identify that risk. I'm not responsible for it, but I'm accountable for identifying it, for sharing it with the business unit, for sharing it with who should actually own the risk. So there's a lot of involvement. So it's not an easy answer to put it in a RACI chart, I guess. But who actually owns the risk? Ultimately, it's the board.
So it sounds like there's a lot of challenge around saying what it is, but not as much around saying what it isn't. Is that fair?
What is it and what isn't it?
It is what it is. So, Ferhat, I think this is a really interesting question for you because you don't have that kind of a role. So you're outside in, I mean, your job, ultimately, your team's job is to provide information to have people make better decisions. How do you want that information to be used? Does it go to the CISO? Does it go to the chief risk officer? Does it go to the CFO, the board?
I mean, it should go to practitioners and decision makers in that order, right?
Well, but what kind of decisions? About what tool to buy or what business to accept or in the context of third party, what vendors to do business with?
It comes to the risk decisions, right? Should I accept the risk working with this vendor? Should I change the vendor? Am I prepared if something happens to that vendor? So we are helping customers by providing the intelligence to make those decisions. But when it comes to ownership of the risk, English is my second language, right? When I hear the word own or ownership, it seems very weird to me to own something very abstract, like a risk. But you can own a car, you can own a house. So I'm trying to make an analogy to that point. Let's say three of us, we have a car. We have all, equal ownership of the car. But Bob is the guy who is responsible to maintain the car. if something happens to car, are we going to blame Bob or because
I'm totally blaming Bob.
So it comes to that, right? When we talk about the ownership of something, which is an abstract definition like risk, it's weird to put a sentence like that.
That is a very interesting metaphor. I always kind of talk about it this way. So CISO goes to the business owner and says, hey, Mary, we got a pretty big problem. He explains the problem, and Mary says, you're right, that sounds terrible. What should we do? And the CISO says, well, we've identified 3 options. Option A is we could do nothing and accept the risk. Option B is we could spend, $1 million and that'll treat a lot of the risk, or we could spend $3 million and really get it down below our risk appetite. And Mary says, like 0. Let's not spend anything. And the CISO says, are you sure? Because we're pretty exposed and something bad's going to happen and we're going to get sued. We're going to lose. And it's pretty likely. And Mary's like, I'm good with that. And then something bad happens, and who gets in trouble? The CISO, not Mary.
Well, the CISO made a mistake. He was using the term we. He was already informing her that he's willing to co-own it with her and take responsibility. So he or she was not doing a good job. He had to put it on.
So I like that.
Had to put it on the person.
Yeah.
You're in this particular case. You're acting as if you are the risk owner, and I respect your role. And I'm going to assume that you have the authority to own the risk. So when you go through those questions, you're as a CISO, you're doing the right thing. You're informing that business owner what the risk options are. And if she says, well, do nothing. Oh, okay. Well, not a problem. The probable loss exposure by doing nothing is X million dollars. Let's get that documented and let's get a risk acceptance on the record.
Right.
You're putting it on the record.
Sign this piece of paper.
Accountability. And I would 77.43% of the time, you like that on the fly.
Precision versus accuracy, which we talked about last episode.
That business unit person's going to go, I can't do that.
Right.
You've identified the problem. And then the question is, well, who can? Is it the senior VP? So you're in that process. You, as a CISO, you may not out of the box know who, everybody thinks they own the risk or they want you to own it. But when it becomes actual accountability, that there's a record that if the SEC wants to see who made the decision, it points to that risk owner. It's been documented. That's the way to do it.
In your terms, then the ideal scenario is the business unit owner owns the risk.
No, that's not my ideal scenario.
That is the ideal scenario.
No, I'm not
really
your ideal scenario.
the only option, really.
Yes.
But it's
So then it comes back to this though. Then there is a very important responsibility of a CISO to explain the risk and document.
Absolutely.
and that's where the ball gets dropped more often.
If CISO does not do that, if the CISO does not do that, if does not explain the risk, then who owns that risk? Then it comes back to CISO.
Well, the owner,
Right.
the owner still it doesn't change.
But accountability changed.
Yeah, if I've done a poor job of informing the business unit of that risk, I don't assume the risk. I've just assumed the risk of I've done a really crappy job, and if something bad happens,
You're going to get fired.
I'm going to get fired. So the risk owner doesn't
and should get fired.
Should. The risk owner doesn't change. It's incumbent upon me as a CISO to explain not only the risk, the exposure, but the options.
It's not just the explaining to the stuff, right? Sometimes you explain stuff very well, but the other party is resistant to change, and then the CISO should have a firm stand, right? I saw Bob did that in one of the meetings. We had too many phishing emails coming to the executives, and he said that I am going to put these, measure into place. And one executive said that I am not ready for it. I don't want to. And that executive knows cybersecurity very well, right? And what Bob said, I'm not going to sign off that risk.
Thankfully, Bob was not on video because I know his head was on fire. I remember that conversation.
No, it wasn't on fire. It's a legitimate stance from that executive, from that knowledge. And my point was, well, there is no. For me, it was the CEO could override the decision of it's not going to be exclude me forever. It was a realistic request. It's like the impact to me could be hurt my productivity. I need 30 days of testing to evaluate to see will it work. Very legitimate thing, and that's what it was. And the process was the exception for the short period of time, and then the testing was done, and it showed that it was good, and it moved. That's a good process. It's not always saying no, or it's not being a waffle and not taking a stance.
Right.
It's having the courage to actually maybe stand up to someone who's more powerful than you are to make the right decision.
You're super lucky because you have that, right? You have that gravitas. A lot of CISOs I talk to don't. I mean,
Why are they a CISO?
That is a different question. But I mean, our customer advisory board, when I first started doing it, I asked a bunch of people, I said, do you have the power to say no? Can you say we are not doing business with that vendor? Not one put their hands up, right?
Well, I never say we're not doing business with a vendor.
Well,
that's the wrong question.
I'm simplifying it, but they didn't, at some point though, you got to be able to put your foot down, right? You got to lay the hammer down. No, I'm not okay with that. It's too much risk. We're going to escalate that until somebody makes the right choice.
Well, I don't make the decision that it's too much risk either. It may be outside my risk appetite, but I'm not the owner of the risk. It is my role to inform, and in a case like that, I have to have the gravitas to escalate that above that senior VP to the CEO. That I need to do. It's if I can't do that, then I shouldn't be a CISO. It's as simple as that. Right. If you're in a role as a CISO and a title is going to make you make bad risk decisions, I highly recommend look for a different role.
Bob, you and I remember, Ferhat may not remember this, but years ago, big companies had management trainee programs. You came in and you spent 6 weeks in every business unit.
Yeah.
Nobody does that anymore, right? We need to do that with security people, and it doesn't happen. And
I have a real simple answer for a CISO. Are you in the right place? Who do you report to? Yeah. And I know.
Is that always the thing? Because I've seen CISOs reporting to CIOs that work really well, and then I've seen it where it works terribly.
Well, no, I'm looking at it differently. It's about the level of involvement in the company and the decisions that are being made. I have the luxury that I report to the CEO. I am in every meeting where senior executives are. Sometimes discussions about ARR and all those types of things, are mind-numbing to me.
I'm with you,
but it allows me to see what's important to the company, how the company operates, the bottom line. It gives me that vision into there. So, if the CIO was going at that level, and then they would come back to me and then tell me what they thought, there's a filter. I'm not as connected.
That's the interpretation.
Right.
But here's the thing. You have the luxury. You were on board when the company was 30 people. Right?
Was there that many?
Maybe less. So you've seen that.
I think my employee number's 4.
Yeah. Not all CISOs have that sort of.
I know. And that's a challenge. And that's one of the things I think in the industry should change, is that, that they have a chief information security officer. So there's 4 letters. So they're not really at the executive level. So they should be one down.
Is that the rule? 3 letters is.
That's the unwritten
In
rule.
fact, if you have 4 letters in your title, like myself, and if you're another CISO, that's a made-up rule.
Yeah.
Well, to be fair, my title's made up too.
Yeah. Everybody's title's made up, right?
Here's interesting. So I do a lot of mentorship, and I was actually mentoring a young lady. She's getting a master's in cybersecurity at a very well-known university in Boston. And she told me that they won't let her take business classes without special dispensation because it's a different school in the university. And I literally lost my temper, not with her, but with the university. This is a business function, and they're not letting her take business classes.
Yeah.
That is just infuriating for me. So let's talk a little bit about a cultural thing that I think we need to address. We very much live in a blame game, right? Whose fault was it? who can I wag my finger at? And when I manage people, and it's been a while, but I had one rule: I don't blame anybody. Let's solve the problem. And if you want to go do a postmortem and figure out why it came to fruition, I'm fine. But I'm not pointing the finger at anybody. How do we move away from that blame game, right? You didn't do whatever, right? Then it's no longer we, right? We all work for the same company. We all have the same objectives. We all, at some level, want money coming in, money going out. And if so, right, we've talked about that. How do we move away from that culture of blame?
You're asking, how do we change human nature?
Sure. Okay. I'm good with that.
And
we got time, 2 minutes.
we're going to solve the problems next episode to solve the problems of the world. But it really is. It's human nature to be very focused on self-preservation.
But can't we set up a culture of an organization so that it's not about that?
Well, now let's talk about the culture in an organization, definitions of that. We're into so many nebulous definitions and how things really work. It's humans, and humans are inherently different. They're inherently, their genetics are disposed for self-preservation, flight or fight. It's in our genes. So, in that culture, how do we change that? Well, very challenging. The culture is it an open culture, or is everything about the business? Does the CISO, are they involved in that? Is the CEO? To be honest with you, there are microcosms that I see where the cultures are amazing and the blame game doesn't exist. Across the board, how we change that? If I knew that, I'd write a book about it and I'd retire.
And that's the problem, right? There's 50 million books on culture, and Peter Drucker has a great quote, right? Culture eats strategy for breakfast.
Yeah. So how do we change it? I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know.
I mean, so I want to contextualize and I want to hear your answer.
Okay.
So you and I have talked about this multiple times, right? You feel like you are two people when you speak Turkish and English. And I love that. And that made me think so differently. And I appreciate that from you. And you actually talked about it before when we were talking about words. So that's a cultural thing, right? So I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on sort of, because you essentially every day have to bring two cultural perspectives to bear in your operations in a company that's mostly in the U.S., right?
Yeah. I mean, the Western culture and Eastern culture is different because on the Western culture, it is more individualistic, right? You need to save your own position.
That was a good word. I like that.
But in the
So for those of you out there that don't know, Ferhat does not use bad words.
I'm very proud of it.
As you should.
We are too.
I wish I did not use bad words.
But in the collectivist culture, when you have a team, the blame game doesn't stop, then you blame the other team. Now, in this third-party world, that your ecosystem is not within your company anymore. Now, even if you have that culture within your company, you start to blame the vendors. And we have seen so many examples, like a company blame a vendor because of a cyber incident. That vendor blames another vendor, and that blames another vendor. But there are also good examples like that. The CrowdStrike outage, they own the problem right away.
Yeah.
I love what they did. I didn't love what happened, but they own the problem.
And I bet that will never happen again.
Yep. That was actually a good example. In fact, that blaming culture between the vendors that remind me an incident in Turkey. It's not a cyber incident. So there was some sightings of boars in a city, and the citizens complained to the government saying that, hey, there are boars in our city, we are afraid. And then
Boars, you're talking about the pig animal.
yes,
Okay.
the animal, the wild pigs. So they wrote to the city council saying that, hey, you have to do something about it. The city council, instead of doing something, they said that, hey, we saw the boars going to the next city, so it's not our problem anymore. And then the government writes the next city, and the next city, and next city. And Turkey has a border with Azerbaijan, and until Azerbaijan, that boards like moved on the paper, they kept blaming each other. So we see the same thing, like the vendor blaming is the new culture, which I don't like, because
it's not a new culture. It's all about the contracts.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, maybe it's a
Yeah,
contract.
this is a big thing for me about collaboration, and I always say, right, we don't collaborate inside our own companies.
Yeah.
We don't collaborate with companies in our vertical. We don't collaborate with companies outside our vertical. And the bad actors, we've talked about this before, they're collaborating, they're working together, and actually, I talked about that when we were on stage together in Phoenix 2 years ago. They're handing our asses to us. And that's a big part of the reason why they're collaborating and we're not. They're working together. They're talking. And
So your
We
war
just not.
example gives me a Arizona coyotes.
Mhm.
So a lot of people move into Arizona and they see a coyote walking down their sidewalk. And the next thing you know, they're freaking out. They're calling the police. They're calling the game protection. They're going to get my pets and how horrible it is. And the answer is always, well, you're living in their land.
Right.
So you have to change your behavior. You have to don't let don't walk your little dog without a leash. So you can see a lot of folks in Arizona, they're little dogs in a harness and they have a handle. So if you see a coyote,
we have coyotes in the woods behind my apartment in New York too. When you hear them fighting, boy, that is,
it's crazy. It's scary.
Crazy.
But what's happened is instead of blame game, it's the coyote's fault or it's the government's fault. It comes back to individual ownership, and it takes the community, the people that know that they help educate the new folks. And the coyotes, I love seeing the coyotes. They're well fed in Arizona, which means not everybody quite listens. But
Well, you're making a point, right? Don't be an idiot.
yes,
Is a pretty good rule to live your life.
yeah. If we could get that same thing in the risk world, it'd be great.
Yeah. But we know it doesn't happen. You look at the legal environment. Years and years ago, I managed a hardware store in New York. And on lawnmowers in New York, there's a sign that says, don't mow your lawn after it rains. Why? Because some idiot did that. The lawnmower cut his foot off. He sued the lawnmower company and he won.
Yeah.
Right. So some of these things I think are common sense. So, all right. I think we could literally fill 17 episodes just about this. I don't know that we solved anyone's problem. I think we surfaced some problems, but I'm going to give you a phrase and I'd like to hear your kind of thoughts on it. When everybody owns a problem, nobody owns a problem. Thoughts?
I'm trying to think of a word I can use that Ferhat would not like.
Bupkis, shenanigans,
Cluster F.
bullcocky.
There's no accountability. When there's no accountability, then there's failure is inevitable.
We hear all the time, everyone owns security. Everyone needs to be responsible, but clearly we can't have that.
No, everyone doesn't own security. Everyone needs to be involved. Being involved and being accountable are two different things. And when the concept of everybody owning security is that you're, as an individual, you should be accountable for your own security actions. That is accountability down to an end user perspective. So without accountability, it is. They've done movies about it. What's the movie where sun goes down and you go out and everybody goes wild in the streets? I mean, it's that type of. There's no accountability.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
they're up to version 97
Something
now. I
early.
thought you were going to talk about a vampire movie. So, what are your thoughts? If everyone owns it, nobody owns it.
Everybody cannot own it anyway, right? But I agree that from an individual perspective, if I see a phishing email and if I get all the trainings and if the tools are there, but I still get the phishing email and I know there's a very good phishing email, if I click that link, that I own the risk, right? But I cannot control some of the things. So those are the things that I should not own at all.
All right. So I think we can sum that up in F around and find out.
Cyber risk can't hide in a black box, not when regulators are asking for proof. Black Kite reports are fully auditable, fully mappable to standard frameworks, and ready to share with your board or your auditor today. Make your vendor cyber risk program inspection ready at blackkite.com. That's blackkite.com.
Welcome to our Research Roundup segment. Today we're going to talk about one that I find this is really interesting. A report from NACIO, which is the National Association
NACIO.
What's that?
Nasio.
Nacho?
Nasio, not Nasio.
Nasio. You say potato, I say potato. In any case,
National.
This group.
Vienna's national. It's
All right.
national.
This group. It's a great group. It's a member group of all CIOs across, I think 49 states have CIOs now. But they did a study with Deloitte, and they found that 1/3 of state CISOs, so security lead for the states, lacked a dedicated cybersecurity budget. So in other words, they are fighting for budget with the people that buy light bulbs. How bad is that? Well, that's a rhetorical question. It's really bad. Public sector, we know their exposure. We know they have a lot of critical data. They provide a lot of critical services. Why do you think it is that they don't have their own budget? It's 2026,
So,
not 2006.
I find that shocking. Being a former state CISO.
Well, Commonwealth.
Commonwealth, Pennsylvania, still a state CISO, and attending NASIO events, and receiving NASIO awards actually for the security program.
Well deserved.
I'm very familiar with them, and that shocks me. I was a member of multi-state ISAC, as a state CISO, and there are a lot of budget problems. But I'm trying to remember any state CISOs that I knew of that didn't have a budget, that they didn't have a big enough budget. They couldn't do that. So I'm trying to understand. Maybe
Were they pulling money from the IT budget? Because I feel like that's what they're talking about when they talk about dedicated budgets. As Ferhat pointed out, we don't actually read the research. We just go on the headlines.
So it's all one budget. So it's the government budget, and under the different departments, there's different appropriations, and those appropriations go down. It's a very complicated process, but I would like the nuances of that. So I do remember going through a process. I wanted to stand up a security operations center, and I can talk about this now because the CIO who did this, he's retired, no longer the CIO there. And I went through a 2-year process of the justification, getting through the budget process, and I actually got the budget to stand up a SOC. And I got called into the CIO's office and said, "Hey, Bob, you're not going to get that budget." I had budget, but it got taken away to improve the server farm.
To buy light bulbs.
Actually, it was to buy light bulbs. Part of it was actually, but it was electricity to run on a second electric line, to meet certain standards, to have a data center that was award worthy. So budget can disappear. So maybe it's dedicated.
Well, in the government in particular, it's a zero-sum game.
Yeah,
right? You got X dollars, full stop. So any thoughts from you, Ferhat? I know you don't necessarily work directly with those folks, but I mean, how do you feel about hearing something like that? The person running security doesn't have a budget to run security.
It's shocking, of course. I wonder how much budget the other 2/3 have. That's another.
Not enough.
From my experience, not enough, but they had budget.
They had budget, and the criticality of a state is also important, right?
Yeah,
you might. People always think about the criticality of a state from a population perspective or an economical growth perspective. But sometimes you have a critical infrastructure in a small state or a less populated state that they should have budget. And if one of these 1/3 of the states that we are talking about, if they own a critical infrastructure like a dam or something like that, and if they don't have a budget, that's a problem.
I mean, think about it. Now, granted, every state is different, but some of these states, they're running infrastructure for law enforcement. Right? They're running infrastructure for life-saving things. They're running infrastructure for healthcare or for payment of subsidies for people that can't afford it. They're just to draw kind of a corollary. There is I don't know if it got passed, but there was a proposition for a law in the UK that would not allow federal government agencies to pay ransomware. And I go, in theory, that's a great idea, but what happens when people can't get their food or can't get their welfare payments or can't do that? Like we've seen what happens. I just don't think that's a good way to go. And if you want to do that, then you have to provide services, which they don't want to do because they don't have any money. So I don't necessarily have any thoughts other than it's very upsetting that in 2026, this is still a discussion we're having.
It's going to make me read the full report. because the nuances are.
We got a long flight home tomorrow.
Yeah, I'll download it and do that. But you think about it, you hit on a key point is the size of the state. The state that I was a CISO at was, at the time, I think, the sixth largest with
I was going to say, definitely top 10.
11 million citizens. Significant.
And a lot of industry and a lot of things to support. It's you got major cities, you got Pittsburgh and Philly, and
and a lot of the smaller states, obviously their budgets are clearly going to be smaller simply because the tax base isn't there. We did, I think when I was there, is $24 billion in tax revenue. So significant revenue. It was a lot. So this is I think far more nuanced. It's scary, yes, but far more nuanced. I gotta read it and see what it says.
we'll revisit this in a future episode.
I think we should.
Once we've read the report. All right, awesome. I love this because I think it's interesting to sort of see whether sometimes these research reports are not reflected in the reality, and sometimes I think they're overly reflected.
Well, it depends too, because there was a month or so ago, MIT put a research report out that they had to withdraw because it was made up.
Well, the other one that I saw, this is back a while, and I actually called them out. They said 60% of CISOs report directly to the board or something. And I was like, I don't think that's right. And really what they meant was they talk to them, not report to them.
I think they did. They based their research on surveys that were non-existent or something. It was crazy. So that's, I gotta look into it. I don't have the answer.
All right. So we'll revisit it on a future episode.
Yep.
All right. So that has been today's research roundup.
Connect with us on LinkedIn. You can find all three of us there, keeping the conversation that shapes every episode.
Now comes one of my increasingly favorite parts of third party. Agree or disagree. I am going to put out a couple of postulates. We're going to get a thumbs up or a thumbs down, and then we're going to have some discussion. So the first one, risk is everyone's job equally. I'm going to go sideways on this one.
It's complicated. It's everybody's job, but equally. Is it equally fun? No, is it everybody's job? We didn't say ownership, so
I think everyone needs to be involved, and I think people do need to be held accountable. I'm a big fan of sort of behavioral security, which is we're going to tell you what outcomes are, and you need to kind of not be a Momo.
Yeah,
I think that's fair. But again, I think that it comes back, we talked about earlier about, the blame game and all that. And I think that if we educate people properly and they continue to do the wrong things and they do it through sort of wanton disregard, I think people need to be held accountable for that. And I think sometimes that does not happen. Okay. I actually like this one. Chief financial officer, CFOs should be accountable for cyber risk reporting. I'm going to go thumbs up on this one. Okay, you hesitating up.
What made you go up?
Well, CFO, now we need to teach CFO
You're like rubbing your head though for hot. Like you seem to be struggling with this one.
It is struggling, because based on the CFOs that I know, teaching them the cybersecurity is a very difficult job. They need to understand the cybersecurity. Of course, if you quantify the cyber risk, we are making their job easier. But not everybody quantifies the cyber risk. And if you do not put dollars and cents in front of a CFO that they will not understand, they will be backing up from that responsibility.
Yeah, and I guess it's a nuance of the question. Is the CFO going to actually understand and pull all the information together? And I think the role of the CISO is to inform the CFO, because the CFO is ultimately responsible. It's financial impact, it's exposure. So it goes there, but you need to have a CISO that can inform the CFO.
Right. Yeah, no, I love this. And back earlier in my career, I used to talk to a lot of people about reporting. And I think ultimately all of the things being in place, I think the CFO is actually where cybersecurity should report. Because to your point, right, and I've talked about this before, what are the goals of a business? Money coming in, money going out, and who gets in trouble? And we've talked about the blame game extensively, but the money coming in and money going out, that's the CFO's purview. And they're, I think, the ones ultimately that need to be involved. And I think we need to do a better job of educating them and helping them understand And, we've talked about that quite a bit on many episodes, which is how do we contextualize this stuff so that they at least understand what decisions they're making. Love that one, and I'm not surprised. And then the final one, regulators will force clarity before companies do. And I think this requires, so we talked about this beforehand, I think this requires a little bit of sort of explanation. I think what we're really talking about here is, are regulators going to have to step in and tell companies you better or else before the companies say this is the right thing to do for our business, to maintain the business, to maintain resilience, to keep the money flowing, to keep sort of, risk exposure. So I unfortunately have a thumbs up on this one. It makes me super unhappy.
Well, with the context you gave it.
Before the context I was going to do is anyone with my feet, I was going to.
Yeah, but I think it's problematic that organizations, humans will act against their best self-interest. It is what it is. And I think companies will do the same. And I think until we, especially publicly traded companies, all people want to measure them on is, you're going to make your numbers this quarter.
Yeah.
And security does not help people make their numbers this quarter.
Nope.
So it is unfortunate. I do think regulators need to do a better job of understanding what it is they're regulating. And that's why I think we need more public-private partnerships, and we need to be constructive. And again, back to what we've talked about a bunch, when you get the public sector involved, the first thing is going to be, I don't want to get in trouble. So we need to sort of abstract and sort of preserve. We need to make it okay to admit you did something wrong without thinking that you're going to get whacked with a big giant hammer.
Yeah, and I wouldn't want to be a regulator. Their role. I'm going to defend a regulator.
Somebody write this date down.
But it's important. But the problem is if it's too prescriptive or if it's not. And they default on not prescriptive. And I totally understand that, because as soon as you're very prescriptive, you're wrong, because things change. So that is the challenge of regulating effectively.
Yeah. And I think a couple of examples of regulations that didn't work, right? PCI, I think, is an interesting example. Whether PCI worked or not is open for discussion, but the payment card industry basically realized they were going to get regulated. So they got ahead of the curve and they actually created PCI for themselves. And I think there are pros and cons about whether it worked. I think we also have like HIPAA in the U.S. healthcare is a great example. A bad example. HIPAA compliance is now the risk rather than protecting the patient data. And I think that's a huge problem. We have to make sure that the risk exposure is related to the underlying impact.
Well, PCI is the same way. It's now it's no longer protecting card data. It's are you contractually compliant to PCI, and you can breach all the data you want. How many payment card breaches were there where the company that had the breach was actually PCI compliant?
Probably.
Yeah.
And then Sarbanes-Oxley, I think, is another example. Sarbanes-Oxley was created to prevent financial reporting fraud. It ended up being incredibly expensive. 404 and 302 is the other technology one. Put a lot of companies out of business. The only people that really benefited were the consulting companies and the audit firms. And ultimately, I don't think it solved the problem. If I'm an AP clerk and the CFO comes and says, I want you to book this way, I'm going to do that and go home. So I think that, those are three examples where we have some challenge. Hopefully regulators will learn from the past, and I won't say anything else.
The ones I've met and talked to have. I think it's very, very hopeful and very.
I think it's unfortunate though that they're sitting in these big giant sort of bureaucracies, and we saw it with the SEC ruling, right? Yeah. Companies push back on the requirement to have cyber expertise on the board, so they pulled it out. All right, so this again, I love this. I think this is actually super fun to do agree or disagree, and feel free to post comments below on. I think you can. On YouTube, I guess, is where you'd have to comment. But tell us what you think about, do you agree or disagree on any or all of these things? We would love to hear from you. Next week, we're going to answer the question, whose breach is it anyway? We're going to break down the messy world of liability with no legal advice, because we are not attorneys, third parties, and finger pointing that follows every single cyber incident. Remember, cybersecurity doesn't thrive in the shadows. It demands daylight. Until next time.